That's a long, I was on my way.
I see that.
I was on my way.
And you were close. You were very close.
Real
You
close.
could have
Bike that far, right?
You could have totally biked that.
It's just down there.
But getting back on track, because I know Neil has a bunch of things planned for you folks. So Woodstock was known, it was too small from the beginning. They were hoping for 50,000 people a day. So the rush is on to find a place. John and Joel are probably the people that meet Howard Mills down in Middletown, which is Orange County, about 40 miles from here. Did you say Warwick? No. Who's from Warwick? Nobody. Okay. Somebody else is from Warwick.
Okay. It
Not
wasn't
with your
here.
group. Howard had a several hundred-acre family orchard site that was dying and had been blown over by winds, and they were being cleared out, make an industrial park. They entered an agreement. We'll pay you, Howard, to clean it up, turn it into a concert site, and we'll clean it up after we're done, and we'll give it back to you, and we'll pay you to do that. Great idea. They enter into a contract. Howard thinks we better check with the town. They go to the town, and the original name for the concert was Woodstock Ventures presents a music and art fair and Aquarian exposition. But what is that? The town would say, well, it's for families. And there'll be trades and crafts and food. There'll be some music. And the town said, that's great. As soon as all the, well, there were 13 hog farmers that came in early to start building infrastructure in the sites. And people were showing up from around the country looking bedraggled and hippie-like. There will be a quiz, where does the word hippie come from later. But the town of Wallkill raised the stink. You know, get them out of here. Howard Mills had death threats. Howard Mills personally knew Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson was called by other folks. He called Howard, what the heck's going on down here? Get him out. But Howard had a contract, he was an honorable man, because I can't throw him out. Ultimately, the town figured out that on July 15th, they said, we've changed the regs. Congratulations, you can have your concert. The only stipulation is that if this is the property line, I, as a resident, should not be able to hear, see, or smell you beyond the property line, which we know is impossible. And it's amazing because a mile down the road they had a dirt track that you could hear 10 miles. So Woodstock Ventures has to leave. They realized they could fight it, but they had signed, almost 30 bands. They had spent about $500,000 at that point. They had sold upwards of 180,000 tickets, more than they thought they were going to sell. So the race was on. Let's step over here and talk about Max.
This was in July, he was talking.
Yeah, that's what
concert was in August.
Yes.
So Max, like I said, was a dairy farmer, largest dairy farmer in Sullivan County, fourth largest in New York State. He was an educated man. He was 49. He had a chronic cardiac condition. He had already had heart attacks, but not a lot of people knew that. And he was for the war, Republican, very conservative. But it riled him because he was following in the paper these youngsters trying to put on an Aquarian exposition, music and art fair, 40 some miles away. So when Woodstock Ventures came with a real estate agent, Max wasn't going to take the meeting because that's a field to grow hay on for his cows in the winter. When he found out it was Woodstock Ventures, he took the meeting because what happened was he went to his town when he thought they were going to kick back on it. He said, listen, we're even in American history. We've lost hundreds of thousands of American soldiers dying for the freedoms that you're trying to prevent these kids from having. So you're having that concert. Now, with 3 weeks to go, there was no way to form a real legal defense. But Max's words echo. And I think today that still makes everybody proud of our Bill of Rights and the Constitution, in that we're all in this together. It's not all your way or all their way. So because Max said yes, the concert didn't happen. Now, there's a million things, literally a million things I could talk about at this point. But are there any questions? And I'm looking for a way to proceed because
How did the gentleman that did all the security for Woodstock move that quickly to another spot?
Excellent question. Now I know which way to go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, if we all hang over here to the right, it gets crowded at times. I'll go around you. So we want to stay out of the way of everybody else and things of that sort. But the idea here is that we're walking into the field. And if, you're surrounded by people on both sides, and these are obviously actual photos of the field. This is on a loop, and there's a spot that I like to call people's attention to, so I just had to tune into it for a second. I said it was a story of 450,000 individuals, and here we're going to talk about 4 individuals that went above and beyond. The first is Marion Yasgur. She and her husband, Art, had a small country store in White Lake, and all these people showed up without money, and they extended credit, and I used to everybody. And they didn't expect to get anything paid back. Within a year, they got everything paid back.
Oh, wow.
So these 2 people gave all of this food away because they were kids and they were hungry. Next person is Hugh Romney. His name on the placard is Wavy Gravy. He did legally change his name some months later, but he was still Hugh Romney, a beatnik from the 50s, a poet, an artist. Then he became a clown and a jester. And finally, he assumed the persona of Wavy Gravy, the clown, and ran the biggest hog farm in the country, the longest running, and it's still in existence. And we'll talk more about the hog farm later, but they went and they fed people, they saved people, things of that sort. The third person would be Richie Havens at the end. Richie had the pleasure, the disaster, being the first one to perform. We'll talk a lot about him as we get inside. But it was during his performance that he created the song Freedom, which has gone on to carry such meaning for years and years and years to folks. And this guy right here is the fourth person.
Oh.
Max Yasgur.
Yeah.
Max was a local dairy farmer. He was the largest dairy farmer in Sullivan County. And if Max hadn't said yes, there would have been no concert whatsoever. So we'll talk about all of those folks except Mary and her husband. We're done with them for the moment, unless you want to come back. And I don't know, but I hear you're getting lunch today, so you don't have to go to the store and ask for credit. Questions at this point? Let's head around to the 60s, right around the corner. And these folks are saying, I'll take one step of the 60s. For the boomers, right, it was the boomer generation, those of us born between 1946 and 1964. And obviously we were the largest group of kids in history at that point that we know of. And the 60s is when these were on. And if you do the math, and I've done this carefully ahead of time on paper and committed it to memory, that in 1960, the first boomers were entering high school. They're now 14, right? Figuratively. And then in 64, they were entering college. 68, they're graduating. So the oldest boomers, led through with their entire education in the 60s. Now, I was the oldest in my family, but I was only born in 54, so I didn't have anybody to give me the news. So how did we get the news? So we were the boomers, things were in black and white, but the TV, we had one TV. I had one television station where I grew up, and I'll show you on the map when we get there. But most folks had 3, and the TV went off at night. So you only got shown anything by what your folks watched. Music came on 45s and AM radio. So if you were fortunate enough to hear a song you liked because your dad played the station you wanted, then you could buy that song as a 45. And I think you all know a 45, it rotates at 45 revolutions per minute. And then you'd have to have a record player to play it on if he let you play it on it. So getting music was a little bit harder right in 1960. All the 45s are number ones for the dates that they show. The last thing I'd like to mention here is that, looking at our mission statement of inspire, educate, and empower, our youngest elected president, John F. Kennedy, at his inauguration in 1961 said, now I feel like last night nobody sang along with them.
Let the torch be passed to the new generation, right? I mean, I'm paraphrasing,
Yeah,
but
and the other part of that is ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Yes,
Right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
again, goosebumps thinking about, let's lift ourselves. And if we take a moment and we think back to what's happening in that outside world right now, I mean, it's a disaster. There are huge differences, but we've had those before. So it's really looking about commonalities and overlooking certain things because they're transitory. Our problems of last week, I don't know, could we list them? I mean, something was ongoing, but the broken shoelace, I ran out of gas, whatever it was, those are gone. We have to really have a better focus. So that's the beginning of the 60s. Any questions? So midway through the 60s is right over here. You're going to have plenty of time to come to the museum later, and then I guess you're here tomorrow also, or so you're going to dance through this, but there are over 2 hours of video scattered throughout the museum. There are 2 award-winning films. I'll point them out. There's lots of things to read and do. They're all of a certain age that we know they're transistor radios, but it was like the first, smartphone or iPad or MP3 player. Now suddenly, for a few dollars from a part-time job, we could go out and listen to music or the news that we wanted to, when we wanted to. Of course, in my case, we got like 1 or 2 radio stations. Right. We were like tucked away in the mountains there. So there wasn't that much news. But anybody else could get anything that was being broadcasted at night. AM stations would travel thousands of miles. I had a cousin, a DJ in Chicago, and we could hear him at night. And the way those things carried. But the other thing, any questions? I want to point this out. We want to show all sides. I don't want you to go away and say, oh, Ernie's politics or Ernie's religious beliefs or anything. We want to be neutral. And as a museum, we have to show both sides. More and more, we find people are not upset over this artifact because time has gone by. But when I was a kid, the peace symbol represented to my dad an upside-down broken Christian cross. It was the sign of the devil, and it and I could leave immediately. Thank you very much. Where does the peace symbol come from?
From the war or something with the flags and the red. I'm trying to think.
That is halfway there.
Yeah.
That's
I'm trying to
that's
I know.
farther than anybody ever gets.
I know what it stands for.
That's
It's like the red flags from the war or something, and then
Ladies, the genius of your group.
the youngest of your
our baby.
She remembers her history lesson better than you.
I've seen it before.
She's closer to high school than the
Yeah,
rest.
the art of using flags to communicate over distance without radio is called semaphore. So 2 flags, each position represents a letter. And 2 flags like this is an N, and flags like this is a D. And an end of message is when you circle it, say end of message. So it's ND, and it came from the UK in the 50s. A bunch of nuclear physicists called at the nuclear weaponry World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, created the nuclear disarmament movement. And I don't remember right now the artist that who they commissioned and how they got it, but it was co-opted and now has become the peace symbol. But it was nuclear disarmament. So it's heritage is good. The genealogy is right.
That's so cool.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
No, I
One last thing I want to point out here is the timeline, and we have major events of each year, by no means complete. But you know, I mentioned Richie Havens, and here's a young middle-aged black guy at the end of the 60s going on stage as the first performer. He doesn't want to go out there, you know. Yeah, well, I mean, I would be scared too, but, you know.
Well, we 60 was in New York State and not in Georgia.
True, but, you know, we knew what was happening in the country. But it wasn't just the blacks and minorities. Were women treated fairly in 1960?
No, they aren't now.
I know they're not now. Okay, an example I like to point out, regardless of where you stand on this, is the birth control pill first became available in April of 1960. And to get it, of course, you needed to see a doctor, but you needed to bring a husband to prove you were married to get it. And if you wanted a credit card, it was in your husband's name. So I can't believe that women still don't have equal rights. I mean, it's unfathomable. You know, and everybody else, I mean, where's the roadblock? You know, how can we let this go on? You know, and it's like, I know too that if the three of us were born somewhere and were taught A, and you three were born somewhere else and taught B, and we didn't know anything else, you guys would be wrong. You're B's, we're A's, we know better. And you know, that builds, and people get stubborn. Freud called it the narcissism of small differences. We're all insecure, so I look for one little way that you're not as good as me, so I can feel like somebody. And then that's it. You know, we divide ourselves. What were the two most written, talked, and events of the 60s?
Woodstock and Kennedy. The
The
assassination.
assassination
Woodstock, right?
Beatles, probably.
I'm not sure if I heard it or not. Civil rights and the Vietnam War were the two most talked about written events of the 60s. Yeah.
That's, you know what, that's right, every night on the news. I mean,
In 1960, the TV shut off at midnight or 11 o'clock, and by the end of the 60s, we're watching the nightly war and everything else.
and how many
Body counts.
It was awful.
Every
It was in your face. It was.
And the way they
I remember
calculated, if we found 3 dead Americans, well, oh, that must be 180 North Vietnamese, right? I failed math. I didn't take their math. We're going to walk right past the 1968 theater, which is one of two of the opening
I was born in
films.
56.
The 9-minute film in the 68 theater was made exclusively for us by the History Channel. As we get to the end of the 60s, right, exactly. Yeah, by 1968 on Laugh-In, you've got an almost naked Goldie Hawn cavorting, you know, on stage, and you know, all the teens are leaning in trying to read the body paint and staring at everything else. We also had at that point the Mod Squad, blacks and whites and men and women working together as crime fighters. So, you know, society is always trying to move forward. People are saying, no, I don't want progress because I got, you know, I get more money from selling my coal. Screw you and your, you know, environment. They're making it illegal to fund the environment. So anyway, I don't want to talk about that. I guess I can't think of the quote that I read this morning. Radio stations are now mostly FM. They had been FM in the 40s and 50s. They changed the way it was broadcast, so FM radios no longer worked. People threw them out, went to AM, which was not as good. But by the mid-60s, FM was coming back. They had to have a separate format from their AM counterparts. And album rock became one of the choicer things, and that's how we started hearing albums versus 45s. The last thing I want to mention here is that the 68 theater, as we move towards the end of the 60s, one of the events of 1968 that were so dramatic, and you're exempt, but you are a fine historian, as you're the youngest.
I probably know the answer.
She might know the answer.
She probably does.
68?
Well,
What happened in 68?
well, the reason I ask this is because what happened in 1968 is interestingly tied to Woodstock Ventures, which were right around the corner from going to performing the Woodstock concert. But we were watching, you know, our generation grew up watching from I Love Lucy and My Three Sons to body counts and then the protests and the fights. But in 1968, the first event was the Tet Offensive. The North Vietnamese attacked on their New Year's us in South Vietnam, scores of sites, including our embassy, which they took over briefly. And it was such an emotional defeat for the country that Walter Cronkite, equally interesting voice, said on national TV, "I no longer think this is a winnable war." With that, Johnson said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the country." So that starts January. And then we had the dual assassinations. We had Martin Luther King and then Bobby Kennedy. And then the icing on the cake was the Democratic National Convention, where people knew that there would be huge protests, like there are at national conventions, you know, for against the war, for against abortion, for against whatever. So the president, LBJ, and the Attorney General, Ramsey Clark, said, "We need to talk to Mayor Daley. He's a hothead. We know he's going to send in riot squads and make a mess." So they picked one of the smartest guys they knew, that knew about security and disarming situations and mediating and stopping violence. And his name was Wes Pomeroy, professional cop. He goes out to talk to Mayor Daley, Mayor Daley throws him out, and we watched everything unfold on TV. You know, just people being beaten. You know, Wes Pomeroy was hired, let's see if that was in August of '68. In spring of '69, Woodstock Ventures hires him for security, to plan the security. So, one other thing I want to show you about the 60s. Come around the corner. I am no fashion maven in any way. I'm wearing a uniform. Otherwise, you see me in a t-shirt, old pants. But this display shows how quickly the 60s changed. On the left, Jackie Kennedy would wear an outfit like that. My mom and everybody got dressed up to go to the grocery store. To, you know, wherever you went, they were dressed up. By the mid-60s, we had the Twiggy, the skinny look from Carnaby Street in London, the mod look. And then by the end of the 60s, those clothes, the fringe vest, the embroidery jeans, the leather sandals, those were worn by people that attended Woodstock and donated to the museum. We don't know, we know it was 3 different people that wore them. And by the end of the 60s, notice the mannequin is turned away from us. There's no indication whether that is a male or a female outfit. Yeah, those are leather sandals on the right.
Oh, they're sandals, okay.
Yeah, the mud is still on them from...
Okay, from Woodstock, okay.
Yeah, you can go out and visit the mud's relatives. Yeah. It's dry right now, but add water, turns into mud. Comes with directions. You know, we went camping and we used to buy dehydrated water because it wouldn't weigh as much. Okay, you got it.
Really?
Hey, I could have said much worse.